Okay. Um, Welcome everyone. Good evening, good night, wherever you are. Um, I know it's a bit on the evening side in France, and it's mid-morning here. So, welcome to this year's annual lecture in Occitan Studies here at the University of California, Berkeley. Um, th- this group is the purpose of this talk is to inform English-speaking audiences about Occitan, and that's one of the reasons we are recording it to be distributed. Um, our yearly theme this year was what was it? The hidden sides of Occitan, the stories that don't go untold, which for Occitan in general tends to be the entire thing, unfortunately. And today we have two presenters with us. We have Lucie Robert and Marie Sarraute-Armentia, who will correct my pronunciation as I understand soon, and that everyone gets wrong, she tells me. Um, this is recording, right? Yes, it is. They've moved the recording button from my last update. Okay, so Marie and Lucie will be presenting today about the schools in Occitan and also the effects of public policy, but I'm going to pass it to them because they will be explaining this much longer and much more in depth than I will right now. Lucie, Marie, let's see. Oh, no, wrong button. Screen
Yes,
share. Where did it go? Where did screen share go?
we have it here if you want us to try
Please do.
sharing.
Please do.
There we
Okay,
go.
can everyone see the screen? I
Yes.
think so.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
All right, well, without further ado, I'll be starting the presentation with Lucy's approval. Oops. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Adi Schatz. So let's start right away. Sorry, with the slide about me. So, congratulations, Oliver. Actually, you pronounce my name better than most French speakers. That was very good. So my name is Marie Sarraute-Armentia. I am a PhD candidate here in Bordeaux, in the southwest of France, at Bordeaux-Montaigne University, and my research team, and Lucie's as well, is called ICARE. Just for a little context, I am also the treasurer of our student association for Occitan students here at University Bordeaux-Montaigne. I work as a tour guide, but I also teach Occitan to adults and more specifically, so to adults in general and to teachers that are currently learning Occitan in order to become bilingual teachers so that they can teach in both French and Occitan from next year onwards. And I also write about Occitan and languages, especially in two reviews, magazines that you can find online. One of them is in Occitan, Le Diary, and the other one is in English, Silly Linguistics. So, first I'll be talking about my doctoral research. So my research is about Occitan, so we're going to be talking about Occitan a lot. I just put a map here so that you can be reminded or maybe learn where Occitan is spoken, mostly in the southwest of France, in the south of France, sorry, and a little bit in Italy and Spain. And just for information, my research was funded for 3 years by the Public Office for the Occitan Language, which is the public organization, which is a reunion of those two administrative regions that you can see here, Nouvelle-Aquitaine, so we are here in Bordeaux, and Occitanie. And so this administration covers 2/3 of the French Occitan territory and is entrusted by the state to, and the state is the central government is also part of this group and is responsible for devising linguistic policies for the development of Occitan in the southwest of France. Sorry, and so they funded my PhD research for 3 years, but I haven't finished, so I'm continuing without funding, working as a tour guide, hence the tour guide aspect. So the topic of my research, oh yeah, I didn't say, but the presentation, what you're seeing, depending on the languages that you speak, some of it is in French, some of it is in Occitan, okay? So the titles are in Occitan and the text is mostly in French, just so you know. You're not understanding French if you speak French. And so the topic of my research was a public order by the Public Office for the Occitan Language, following this very important survey that they did in 2020, sorry, which is the most recent and largest survey that was done regarding Occitan. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is what was asked of me was to study the positive and negative social representations of Occitan, mostly in the school context, in order to understand what might motivate or might hinder the enrollment of children in bilingual or immersive Occitan programs. So just for information, in France, there are different ways that you can learn Occitan. You can learn Occitan as a subject, but especially in primary school, in the public schools, you can find in some schools bilingual classes where so half of the time is taught in French and half of the time is taught in Occitan. And then we also have private schools that are managed by parents associations, which are immersive schools. They are called the calendrettes. And so the idea was of this thesis was to see how we could maybe encourage more families to choose or at least try an Occitan bilingual or immersive school. In reality, I won't be studying the negative representations that much because, long story short, I didn't really find a way to find people that could enroll their children in bilingual or immersive schools and did not, which would have been what I wanted to do. So I'm going to concentrate rather on the positive representations, or at least the representations of the people who are already partaking in or who have already enrolled the kids in that system. So how do I do that? Well, I'm the kind of person who likes to multiply things and to be all over the map. So I'm currently writing my thesis and I have now to put all the jigsaw puzzle together, but we'll see where it goes. But basically what I did, I started by conducting an online survey or questionnaire using a specific method which is called in French méthode d'analyse combinée des représentations sociales des langues, so method for a combined analysis of social representations of languages. And I had 389, sorry, answers, and there were actually two surveys that were conducted at the same time, one about the representations of language teaching and another one about the representations of Occitan. Then I also conducted semi-directed interviews, 34 of them, with different types of people, parents, teachers, people who work in the development of Occitan teaching, and also students and former students. Then when it comes to the students, especially high school students, it so happens that when I was working at the Public Office for the Occitan language, they were starting a new project called the Lycéens Ambassadeurs, or High School Ambassadors. And so they 59 high school students applied because they wanted to be ambassadors, and 9 of them was chosen, but so I had access to their written comment est-ce qu'on dit candidature? Voilà, c'est pas grave. The written applications, thank you. And then the 9 students that were chosen decided on their own that they wanted to make videos about the heritage of their city in Occitan and in French. And so I was in charge of managing this project. And so I'm going to be studying what they did and how they did it as well. And finally, I went in 5 different schools in 6 different classes to have children draw what Occitan makes them think of in order to try and see what their representations are. I have 98 children drawings, and I have an additional corpus of 5 drawings by teachers and 12 by students from our university that were kind of the test group for this methodology. So very briefly, what kind of results am I expecting? Well, the MAC questionnaire method yields that kind of graphs that I'm not going to delve into because it's a bit complicated, but we can talk about it later if you want. But the idea is that the representation of Occitan here is broken down into smaller units of representations that we call cognames, and people had to say whether they agreed or not with those sentences that I proposed to them. And so here you have the sentences that they didn't agree with, and here the sentences that they did agree with. And the bigger the point or the circle, the more people agreed with that answer, let's say. And then those cognames are also to be found here. This graph basically shows us here at the center what elements are very pivotal to the social representation, to the representation that the group has of Occitan. And what is most interesting in terms of public policies is this second circle here, where we have the elements that are not completely stabilized in the representations, but might be able to enter this pivotal point if we apply public policies towards that aim. Then, very briefly, in the interviews, I haven't transcribed all of the interviews, so this is just to show you a little bit how I work. But basically, I asked people why they chose, for example, to teach Occitan, why they chose to put their children in an Occitan program, etc., etc. And so here you can see that we have different kinds of motivations, and language, which is in purple, doesn't always appear. So it's not always language that is the main purpose. And when it comes to the high school students, what I found very interesting is that they, even though the people at the public office didn't really want them to work on heritage because they thought that young people would not be interested in heritage, in the end, in the texts and in the videos, what they wanted to talk about was heritage. So that's something that I'm going to be delving in. And finally, in terms of the drawings, very quickly, what I found is that most of the children I talked to and I had draw in class don't speak Occitan at home. Their parents don't speak it. Their grandparents don't necessarily speak it. And most of the representations are of school. So here you have literally the school where we were at. So you can see the drawing that is on the school. And then here is a school in general. And here is what is taught in Occitan in that school. And here is the end of this first presentation, and I'm going to hand over the hypothetical mic to Lucie.
Thank you. Yeah, so what we're going to do, I'm just going to briefly stop sharing, and I'm going to share, I'm going to present my thesis now. And for that, we have a different presentation. Let me share again. Great. Here we go. Okay, so so this is me here. I hold a master's degree in international humanitarian law and human rights. So I'm a jurist, we could say, and I worked in that field, in human rights field, for a while, and I became a teacher for humanitarian workers. And so then I decided to take a second master's in didactics of French as a foreign language. And why did I choose to work on Occitan? Well, for many reasons. Two of the main reasons being that it's my family heritage, and also because, well, it's a language that's fast declining. It's a long-standing and ongoing process, and we count less than 10,000 speakers for Occitan Limousin, not for Occitan in general, for Occitan Limousin, that I'm going to show you later, and that's what I'm working on. And the fields that I'm working on are social linguistics and law, because, well, my first love was law, let's say. So I found a way to incorporate that in my PhD. And you can see here in the middle my title. So it's the impact of public policies in the transmission of Occitan Limousin since the Second World War. And so what I'm studying, what I'm working on, is, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the words from here, my title, and we're going to work in reverse. So we're going to start with Occitan Limousin, as Marie talked about it. I'm going to be quick. So here we have a map of France with Occitan here in the south. And what I'm working on is here, the Limousin part of Occitan. And so what is Occitan? It's a Romance language, you probably all know it. And it's spoken, as Marie said, in France, in Spain, in the Val d'Aran, and in Italy, in the Vallée Occitane, and in Guardia Piemontese. I'm looking at Marie because she's always correcting me on that one. And it's been spoken for over 1,000 years and written for also over 1,000 years, well before French was written. And who speaks it? According to the study that Marie mentioned in 2020, we count in the two regions that were studied, so Nouvelle-Aquitaine and Occitanie, around 540,000 people. And what we would call the average speaker of Occitan would be a male, because it's spoken at 66% by men who live in a rural zone and who are on average 66 years old. So you can see that the population of Occitan speakers is not young, and that's something that I've also found in Limousin. So that's Occitan in general, but what I'm working on particularly is the Limousin zone. So that's the zone, if you're familiar with France, that you might recognize some cities here. So we have towns. We have Périgueux, Tulle, Brive, Limoges. That's this part that I'm working on. As I've said, we have less than 10,000 remaining speakers, and the UNESCO called that Limousin idiom seriously in danger. And something that I want to work on a little bit is the glossonyms. So glossonyms, it's basically the name that we give to a language. And we can see that for Occitan Limousin, we can find different names. So people name their language Occitan Limousin. They can also name it Limousin, Parler Limousin, or Langue Limousine, or Patois. And I want to stop a little bit on Patois. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Patois. It's highly negative. I don't know how you would exactly translate that in English, but I think it would be something like flail around or move around. It's in French, it's like gesticuler, something that's very, very negative. And that's not me calling it like a negative thing. It's actually the French Academy. I have here the definition. They called it a poor and rustic language and comprehensible jargon. So you can imagine the consequences when one calls your language something incomprehensible. And well, it's not really a surprise, but like in the territories studied by like Oplo, the study Marie mentioned in Corrèze, for example, which is like one part of Occitan Limousin that I'm studying, well, 79% of speakers call it Patois and not Occitan. They do not say they speak Occitan, they say they speak Patois. And actually, when we've conducted a study with Marie that I'm going to speak about later, we noticed that some people didn't really know what Occitan was. Some didn't know at all what Occitan was. So that's about the Occitan. Then onto the transmission. So who can transmit a language? It can be schools or families. And what I'm also studying, if it's in the family, if there is a gender factor, if like women did transmit it more or less, and sometimes it's less, we can talk about it more if you have questions afterwards. And I'm also studying why transmit or not transmit. There is a variety of reasons. Some of them you can see them here. So for example, you don't transmit because of the stigmatization that your children will face, or even the discrimination, or you think that you're not teaching the right culture to them. So that's a few reasons. And I'm also looking at the indirect transmission, because like many people, especially from the X generation and the boomer generation, they actually like didn't learn it by having people like talk to them. They learned it by hearing it by people in their community, their family, etc. And because, as I said, I work in law, I'm also looking at public policies, so at all levels, whether it's international or local, and I'm working on different policies, so whether it's about like teaching, linguistics, social policies, all of that. And I'm looking at the impact of these policies on the transmission. So the impact can be direct, for example, like the Loi Molac, if you're familiar, from 2021, that was on like regional and so Occitan as well, but also it can be indirect. For example, we had like a reform of the French baccalaureate, or baccalaureate, where we put in competition the regional languages with what we call the langue vivante, so the modern languages such as English or Spanish, and therefore we have less candidates that are taking like Occitan in the baccalaureate. And the impact can also be like positive or negative, as I said, with the baccalaureate reform. Quickly about like my participants. So I'm working with schools. So I have 6 schools so far. Two groups of 2 conversation groups, 1 village in particular, and with different families from different generations, and also with the associative and militant field. And now onto the interesting part, which are the results. Well, without surprise, I found that the main glossonym, so the way people call their language, is patois, just as the study found out, and also Marie said. And some people did call it Occitan, but it's mainly in schools, so the teachers or the students, because they are studying Occitan, so they do not call it patois. Some of them do call it patois with their family. And also people from the militant or associative field, yes, they also do call it Occitan. And on the question of who speaks it and transmits it, so very quickly, what we call the génération silencieuse, so the silent generation, they do speak it, but they haven't transmitted it. No one from my corpus has transmitted it, and some of them were very vocal about it. They said like, no, why transmit it? Because, and when I said, but yeah, why didn't you? They say, yeah, because in school you need to learn French, you need to know French. So they didn't actually transmit it for fear their children would be like discriminated against, or that they wouldn't access society. Yeah, and from other generations, like for example, the baby boomers and Generation X, so that's, for example, my parents, Generation X, they speak it, well, they understand it like perfectly because they heard it when they were kids, but some of them are coming back to the language, notably via the conversation groups, but many of them like don't speak it and don't have many opportunities to speak it. And from the millennials and the Gen Z, well, very few of them do understand it and speak it, very few. They haven't learned it. Some did in school, but very few. And when they learn it in schools, well, they don't have almost any opportunity to speak it outside of school. So that's an issue. I said I'm working with 6 schools. It's also because there aren't, in the Limousin region, there aren't many schools that are teaching Occitan. Actually, in Corrèze and Haute-Vienne, 2 of the counties I'm working with, there are only 5. It's very few. It's very few. And finally, the public policies, none. People who are not from the associative or militant fields said that they had no knowledge of public actions about Occitan, or patois, as they call it. And people who are from the associative or militant space, they say that there are none or almost none. There are very few, very, very few public policies. They seem to be a bit more in Dordogne, in another county. And I'm going to work on that. That's what I'm going to analyze now to see why there are more in Dordogne than in Corrèze and Haute-Vienne, for example. And now, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to analyze all the data. I'm going to study, I'm going to dive deep into the public policies. And I'm also going to do another data collection, and mainly speaking to people in positions of power to ask them why there are or there aren't making policies about Occitan. So that's the end of my presentation about my thesis. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back up. Nope, that's fine. We're going to go back to this presentation, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Claro project that we have with Marie. Hopla, that's mine. Great. Okay, so let's talk about Claro. That's the third out of 4 projects that we'll be talking about tonight. So we have many things to talk about. So the Claro project was on linguistic awareness and analysis of territorial representation. We did that also in the Occitan Limousin part. Why? Well, because I had access to it, and also because I did notice that people only call it like patois, and I had never heard someone call it Occitan before I went to the field and I did my study. When I was with my family and everything, I never heard anyone call it Occitan, and we wanted to know why, what Occitan meant to them in relation to patois, and how they perceive their language territory. So what are for them the frontiers of their patois or Occitan? Then up. We had so a bit about the methodology. The sample we had were elderly people in a retirement home. They were from a rural area, from the Limousin region. All of them were from the Limousin region, to whom the language was passed on or not, but all of them had heard it in their childhood. And the hypothesis we had was that they had no formal knowledge of the conceptualization of the Occitan language, especially as it can be the case, for example, in schools or academic environments. We assume that they are not this conceptualization. The interviews were individual, semi-guided with a guide, and we had also drawing on 2 maps, one of the Limousin domain to delimit the linguistic area of their language, and one from France to represent the regional languages, the different regional languages that we have in France. The interview guide was written in the form of like a funnel, kind of. So to start with, from the glossonyms and definitions they would spontaneously give us, and then compare it with the representations expressed with like existing linguistic classifications. And mid-interviews, we would bring the maps out, and they would like be used as a support and a pretext for the conversation and the construction of the discourse and the structuring of the representation and the interview. So now it's, well, the fun part, I don't know, but it's a bit like the expectations vs reality of working in the field. So basically, it's a project on linguistic awareness so that people can name their language themselves without influence from like outside influence. And well, de facto, right from the start, when we arrived and we presented ourselves, we introduced ourselves, they called us the patois lady. Even before we had talked to anybody. So, well, in the end, it didn't change the methodology that much, but it was a bit like surprising. And what you can see here is what it was even written as Projet Études Patois on their monthly schedule. So it was the Patois project. Yeah, so we actually kind of decided to accept our fate, and we came up with this. This is a GIF, it should be animated. Normally, we call ourselves now the Dame du Patois en vadrouille. En vadrouille in French means like out and about or on the road. So yeah, basically that's us in Marie's Twingo in the Limousin, talking to people. And what we also initially planned was that people would draw, like they would draw themselves on the maps, and they would comment what they were doing or answer my questions. And what happened was that many were not like physically able to draw on the maps, and also some of them didn't really see or seem to perceive the interest of this exercise. Therefore, I'm the one who took the pencil, and under their strict instructions, I was drawing, like asking them, oh, do they speak it here? Oh, you're not sure? Do you want to put a cross or something? What should we do? And also we had planned that the maps of France would have like more things written on them, more regional languages. And well, in the end, only 2 out of 13 were filled, and that's the maximum that we had. Means that the 2 people who actually like did write something on these maps were about like Bretagne, Brittany, so they knew there was a language there. And this person also had heard about Occitan, and when we asked where is Occitan, well, she said, oh, it's in the south. And when she put it on the map, she put it in Angers, which is neither south of France, neither like south from where we were. So we don't know. And she also said that there was a language spoken in Paris, different from French, but she could not elaborate more on that. So we don't know what we're going to do with that, but yeah. And well, with absolutely no surprise, it's the same from what I found when I was studying when in the field, or what Marie also found out. The main glossonyms, the only actually glossonyms that was spontaneously given by the participants was patois. They had no knowledge of other glossonyms used to describe the idiom in the region. No one mentioned like Corésien or Limousin, and they had limited knowledge of what Occitan is. When I asked the question, have you ever heard of the word Occitan, and if so, what is it for you? Most said that they had heard it without being able to express what it was exactly or what it represents in relation to patois. So there was no linguistic awareness on this. One witness said, for instance, that they thought Occitan was the language, quote, that they write now. So when I asked if that meant that Occitan was the patois that's written nowadays, the person said that she thought it was, but no further conceptualization or representation. And we also had like some maps. And so these close-up maps of the Limousin region are not usable as like standalone. You cannot use them on their own without further explanation, because, for example, between the map from E11.1 and E6, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that outside of the colored area, patois or Occitan is not spoken, but that the person has no knowledge because they have never been there, or they don't know, or they are not sure. So yes. And afterwards, the third day, we had well, workshop all together, a group workshop. The aim was sharing and confronting the representation and point of view expressed in the individual interviews, and have a discussion around audiovisual and written documents in Occitan. We started to talk a bit about our research with Marie, but we will come back. And it served as a data collection by participant observation. And the idea is a bit to try to change the presentation, maybe reduce the stigma. That's the component we added to the project, maybe like reduce stigma around the language. Well, finally, we are going to do some scientific presentations, and one of which is going to be here a scientific poster. And what you can see here are on the left are the maps that I had students draw in class. And these are the maps when Marie talked about her corpus and that she had students like draw some maps. Well, she didn't have them do it, but they did it spontaneously. Well, you see how it can like how different it can be from what our participants wrote and drew. So we're going to analyze that. And we're also going to do a documentary. We had some film. We filmed the participants. So that's what we're going to do. And when it will be ready, we will share it with the Occitan Studies Working Group. Up. And now onto the final project of the night, because we do many projects here. And that's RECLAM, and Marie is going to present that.
Thank you, Lucie. So the idea is that Claro is that Lucie just presented is a project that we're doing together, the two of us, but it's part of a bigger project that we're also part of, but with more people, a group of PhD candidates, mostly from Bordeaux-Montaigne University here, but in partnership with the education faculty of the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And so this project is called RECLAM, which stands for, so it's an Occitan word that stands for, in French, Reconnaissance et Catégorisation des langues minorées et minorisées. So recognition of and categorization of languages, of minority languages. And what's interesting is that in English we say minority languages, and in French, for example, we can say langue minoritaire, langue minorée, langue minorisée, and there are many, many words, and that's one of the things that this project aims at studying, actually. So this is the poster for a preparatory workshop that we organized in January that you can find online. It was filmed, and most of the videos are online. We put the QR code here, and we can provide the website later. And so the idea of this project is not that we study the recognition and categorization of languages, but rather that we organize studies about that, and that we organize scientific communication on those topics. So we had the workshop in January to start the project and to already start partnerships with people from, well, not all over the world, but mostly France and let's say South or Latin America rather than just Brazil. Then we presented the project to the public in Bordeaux during a local Occitan festival in March. And then we're going to be developing a few research projects such as CLARU, for example, by PhD candidates. And then the most important event right now is that we're organizing an international conference in November in Bordeaux, Bordeaux-Montaigne University, that can also be attended online. So please come attend to the to the RECLAM International Conference. And then in 2026, we have a project of publishing what was done during the workshop, and then we hope to publish what will be done during the international conference in Brazil in the following year. And then we hope as well, but we're not there yet, but we hope to organize another conference, this time in Brazil, led by the Brazilian team. The idea is really to have international cooperation and transatlantic cooperation here. So this project is also in continuation of several projects that were or are undergone at Bordeaux-Montaigne University. So, for example, there's database of
categorization
of legal and sociolinguistics texts about how to categorize minority languages that is hosted at our university, for example. That's a project that was done a few years ago and that is now being managed by one of the thesis advisors of Lucie's. And then there's another project about the Guarani community in Brazil that was conducted by and managed by one of the doctoral students working with us, Camille Guichard-Libersac. And then there's also a regional project that's being managed by one of the professors at our university, Nicolas Guillot. We are part of this project, Lucie and I as well, which is called PARLE, which stands for Patrimoine Régional Linguistique, so regional linguistic heritage, and that aims at studying the linguistic variation, mostly, in the three minority languages spoken in the southwest of France, in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region, namely Basque, Occitan, and Poitevin-Saintonge. So the RECLAM project is meant to be what we call a reflexive project. The idea is that we are learning how to do research by doing research, and so this is also a way for us to think about what we want to do later, maybe, and what we want for research in general, in terms of epistemology as well. So this really is part of how we learn. So I'm not saying that's not how people do it in the rest of the world. I don't know. So I'm speaking from a French perspective, but in France, you're really meant to learn research by doing research. So that's what we're doing. But the idea for us is also to exchange practices and ideas with the Brazilian team, because they don't necessarily do research or communicate about research in the same way over there. So we're learning a lot also from that. And that's very, very nice. So, for example, in the workshop, we added new formats of communication that we don't have here in France. That, for example, we presented a few of the doctoral projects, such as CLARU, for example, in front of a jury of experts, 3 experts each time. So it was a public event. It wasn't like it wasn't just them giving advice in private. It was part of the conference, of the workshop. But so we presented officially our project, and then they could directly critique maybe or give advice and things like that. And the idea is then to present the end project at the conference in November, using everything that they helped us with during the workshop. There's also the question of how do we understand each other, because we are the French team. In France, we usually speak French. Most of the people, especially in the research fields, can speak more or less English. It's the case in our team. And then maybe Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. And then in Brazil, they speak Portuguese, they speak or understand Spanish in general, but they don't necessarily speak English. And so, for example, me with the Brazilian doctoral candidate that we work with, I have basically no or almost no language in common with her or with other participants. So that was a big question. How do we organize things and how do we understand each other. I'm going to come back to it later. And then something that we learned from the Brazilian team also, for example, is that one of the main or one of the axes of the conference is going to be the study of what they call academic texts. And that's something that we almost don't study, and because we don't have this concept in France of what an academic text is, a text from academia. So that's also something that we were happy to be able to add to what we're doing and to discover together. So the project is also meant to be inclusive. So in terms of languages, like we said, we are thinking about how to make our events, so the conference, for example, multilingual, and how to ensure that everybody or most people can understand each other and talk to each other, for example. We also want to include the minority languages. We know that this is not a practice everywhere in the world. In France, we are lucky because we can produce and communicate science, especially about those languages in Basque, in Occitan and Breton, it's done. But in other parts of the world, it's not necessarily done. So we want to foster that. But the thing is, if you speak in Guarani, we won't understand. So we need to find a way for the presentation to be able to include Guarani, for example, while being understood at the same time. And one of the doctoral projects that we are, the whole group, the whole committee doing, is that we are actually analyzing our own linguistic policy and trying to improve it. We handed out surveys, for example, after the first workshop, and we are working on that. And then something that we are importing as well from South America is that we want not only scientists to be part of the conference, but also people who come from the general public, from the associative world, for example, so that they can also be part of the discussion and they can present their point of views and maybe network as well with the researchers. At the international conference, there will be three main axes of reflection. One of them will be about how to categorize minority languages. Another one will be how to transmit, how to pass on minority languages. And another one will be how to research minority languages. The languages of the conference will be French, Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and whatever minority language you want. And the idea is that we will ask the participants to be able to communicate either in written form or oral in two of the official languages of the conference, and they can add a minority language as well, so that we're sure that most people can understand one of the two languages plus the minority language.
And we can help, like if they need help, like it's not just like speak these languages, it's like we can help you if you need, like for the presentations and stuff.
Absolutely. And then we have a second call for paper that is still ongoing, that is towards those people who are not scientists, but who would like to share experiences or maybe meet researchers, present projects that they are doing on the ground, grassroots movements to revitalize, protect minority languages that might interest the scientific community, if they want to maybe attract attention so that research projects can be done in their community and things like that. So we are expecting applications for this call for papers by the 25th of May. It's still ongoing. And as a conclusion, well, here is the QR code for the website of the conference, and we're hoping that you will be all attending. The call for paper for scientific papers just closed, unfortunately, but if some people in the public are from the non-scientific community and want to submit something, please be our guest. And if you need any help as well, especially for scientists as well, but usually scientists know how to participate in conferences, but for the people who don't have a scientific background, if you feel a bit lost or if you need any guidance in how to apply or how to make your presentation accessible in terms of languages, if you don't speak several languages, etc., we will be delighted to help, of course. And this concludes our talk. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Merci, Hera.
And we are 42 minutes, so right on the schedule.
Thank you very much, Lucie and Marie, for this presentation of these three wonderful projects and this conference that is upcoming. It's really great to hear some of these things that are happening on the ground, to see the work with both old people and young people, and to try to envision what that gap need is in between and how we can reach that gap in between. We are going to pass to the section of question and answers. But if you cannot stay, this would be your time to pop out very quickly. And I also want to say that we do want to thank our sponsors, the Townsend Center here at UC Berkeley, for the support of this lecture, as well as to give you a note that for next year's theme, our topic is Occitan and careers, to understand what it means to have a career, to have a job, to continue to work daily to achieve some kind of Occitan or minority language goal. So I think your project also fits into that scheme as well. Um, we are going to open the floor to question and answers. You can type it in the chat if you prefer, and we will read it out, or you can ask here, raise your hand. However, there's a few of us, so we'll see how this works. And questions, English or French? Yeah.
Occitan is fun as well, huh? If you want to ask Oliver, if you want to try your hand at asking questions in Occitan.
Maëlle, question?
Yes, please. Thank you ever so much. A friend of mine sent me the link, and I'm actually from Limoges. I'm not originally from Limoges. I'm from Brittany, but I'm working in Limoges, and I'm a sociolinguist too. And I was very. I wondered if you heard about the l'Institut des études Occitanes, the Occitan Institute
Oui.
of Limousin.
Yeah, I did speak to them, yeah.
Okay, because they're doing a lot of work on that, and also, have you considered using Lobiaso for the database, Limousin Occitan database that they're trying to um at least to offer to the general public? Is that something that you have used for when you worked for schools with the children? You talked about audiovisual material in Occitan, and it's specifically in Occitan. So sorry, there's my babies.
No problem. Not yet. We haven't yet used it. Also because, like, for example, for the Claro project, it's still on phase 1. So there are other workshops that are coming. So we might use it in the future. I haven't used it like personally either for my thesis. It's not for because I didn't want to. It's just that it hasn't come up because I'm still on my first like data collection. Therefore, I might do it like for use it then and as maybe a basis or like a tool for a second data collection or to use it in my thesis. So yes, I might use it. I'm not sure yet because I'm still like processing all the data that I got and how I'm gonna like create the links and how I'm gonna do it. But yeah, thank you for the recommendation. Mhm.
There's I saw there's a question in the chat. How many students participate in Bordeaux, the student organization at Bordeaux-Montaigne University? That's a good question. No, not many because we don't have, unfortunately, an Occitan Studies department anymore. We only have evening classes of Occitan in Bordeaux as of now. And in the association, I don't know how many people like paid to be part of the association, like maybe a dozen, but really this year we were basically 4 girls and 3 boys, and the problem is we had scheduling problems, so we couldn't even all get all together. But the girls, we just for information as well, because we participated in an audiovisual Occitan language creation contest. And we are expecting the results at the beginning of June. We created a little film. I don't remember, 5 minutes, something like that.
9.
9 minutes, 9 minutes film. And so maybe maybe you're looking at the next Palme d'Or in the Cannes Festival, who knows, in Occitan, hopefully.
Kiki, it's up to you.
Hello, I'm zooming in also from Bordeaux. I just had the pleasure of taking an Occitan French guided tour of Bordeaux with Marie, and that was just so amazing. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm actually someone who's taking an evening course of Occitan, very beginner, at one of the local calendrettes here in Bordeaux, and it's been an amazing opportunity. So I just wanted to zoom in and say hello and also just ask you a bit because I'm also a researcher, I'm in my second year of my PhD studies. So in the beginning of all of this, and I wanted to ask, I guess, for Lucie and Marie, like, how is it like how does your experience in the field in field work compare to what you expected? Like, is there anything that has been challenging or has surprised you about being like on the terrain, like really being in the field, I guess?
Well, thank you, Kiki. That's a broad question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but for me, for what we did was the realization really, even though I knew that not everybody calls the language the same way, and I have been reading up on that for some time, but really realizing by talking to people that to some people, Occitan doesn't mean anything. And I'm not passing judgment, it's just that I wasn't expecting that because for me, it was such a given because I am researching Occitan. The National Education Ministry is teaching Occitan, and things like that. And so that was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. And I understand why people call it patois, but I didn't expect people to really not have this conscience or knowledge of what the language was. So that was very interesting. And it's true that I haven't been on the field very much for my thesis, and I'm in my 5th year, and I'm going to be doing, hopefully, if the doctoral school accepts it, a 6th year next year. That should be the final year anyway. And thank you. And in the end, what I realized is that in my first 3 years, even though I was in the public office for the Occitan language and I learned so much and I saw so much, but then I wasn't. And then I started to really be part of the associative world in Occitan and to teach and to write in the journal and things like that. And it was kind of like, now I should do all my field work again because now I understand what it means to be in the Occitan community, etc., etc. I talk to different people, they express different points of view, but I'm not going to do that all over again because then I would never finish. But that was something also, and for me, what's a bit surprising, maybe not really because I know myself, but it's that in the span of like 6-7 years, I went from 0 Occitan because before I was 30, I didn't even know that there were Occitan speakers in my family. I didn't even know that Occitan was spoken in Bordeaux. And now my life is like 95% Occitan, speaking, talking, creating GIFs on internet, talking on Instagram. I hope to publish maybe a scientific article in Occitan. I made my first a guided tour in Occitan last year. Now I breathe Occitan, and like 6-7 years ago, I didn't even know that the language was here. Thank you, Oliver. Lucie.
Yeah, I wasn't really surprised. Either for my thesis or for Clau, because like I come from Occitan Limousin, that's where my family lives. That's where I went for all my vacations as a kid, and I had never heard anyone call it Occitan, so I wasn't surprised that people call it patois. I called it patois up till I started my thesis, up till like 2 years ago. I also called it patois till I had like my first meeting with my thesis advisor. I was like, by the way, it's Occitan and it's a language. I was like, okay. But I don't say that in a negative way. And it's funny that I'm saying that because all of the speakers, when I tell them like, do you know what Occitan is? And when they start to maybe think about like Occitan in relation to patois, and they immediately like justify themselves. oh, but I don't mean patois in a bad way, like in a negative way. And I'm like, it's so deeply ingrained in us, like the patois word, that we don't even realize, like, we don't even know where it comes from and what it implies. And so I wasn't surprised, but I don't know if the word is sad, but I was a bit, how to say, um, yeah, maybe a bit sad actually to see elderly people be so vehement when talking about passing on the language. When I would ask, oh, but did you pass it on to your children? Oh, no, 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 no. It was like a definite no for many of them. And to see, like, when I talk to, for example, their children or their grandchildren, it's like, would you have liked to learn it? And they were like, yeah, it would have been nice. It could have been nice. And, there's the thing that, yeah, the public policies, the impact of it all, it's not surprising. It's just a bit disheartening at times.
So
Yeah.
much like my grandparents that came from Quebec, from Montreal. It's like they did not teach to my mother or her siblings French because it was this idea of like English only and assimilation. And so really it's all of the grandkids that are learning French now because, it was, I guess, had a stigma to the idea of learning the language. So thank you so much. That's
And also because you made me think of something, but this idea of whether we use patois or not, and researchers in general tend to not want to use this word or to preface it with a definition, with the context of usage, etc., etc. And for me, I felt it like I call it like a double deconstruction, like when first you arrive and everybody says patois and that's the only thing you know, and then like Lucie said, you go to university and the teachers say you shouldn't be using patois because this is almost derogatory or whatever, and then you speak to real speakers and they only use patois, and so at first you're like, no, you shouldn't do that, and then you realize that you're scolding them and traumatizing them for using the only words they know for the language. So it was as if for me as a French speaker, people told me, no, you shouldn't, you mustn't call your language French. And I'm like, okay, but why and what's the word? And I'm like, who doesn't call French French, So why would I use a different word? And so then there's this second deconstructions of the self, that's this de-learning and relearning, that it is okay to use patois if you know in which context with whom, and you shouldn't like berate people for using it, especially those who don't do it with any bad intention in head. And that's why when we arrived at the retirement home, thank you. At first, when they said c'est les dames du patois, it's the patois ladies, and I just decomposed, and Lucie could see it, and I was like, do we go home now? Because the entire methodology is biased now. We came here to ask them, how do you call the language, or how do you call what you speak, not to use the word language with them to see if they characterize it as a language. And they were like, we were identified as patois, and I was like, okay, what do we do? And then we decided to own it and to just add it in the methodology. That's going to be part of the analysis as well. And it's interesting to see that, we didn't want to say that it was Occitan, patois, language, idiom, minority language, whatever. And we arrived pre-identified because a process had already been going on, and also because that's literally the only word they use. But so for me, that was maybe one of the most striking things, to de-learn and relearn things about patois and how it's okay to use the word. But as a sociolinguist, of course, you have to know why and how to use the word. Thank you.
Daniela, you're muted.
So, thanks also from my side. So it was great to hear what's going on in Bordeaux. As we know, it's not as much. There's no Department of Occitan like there is in Toulouse and like there is in Montpellier. So I'm glad to hear about all these projects at the MSH. I don't know. We never met. So I'm teaching Occitan at the University of Alumni in Munich, and I'm also interested in social linguistics of contemporary Occitan, so I have an ongoing project about this. I was wondering, I kept thinking about the representations and the results that you quickly showed, and I have actually many questions about this, being also familiar with the work of what's his name, Andréo, about the representations of Occitan and calendar data schools. So I guess my first question would be to know. You briefly mentioned, and this is a question for Marie, so that you had very little negative representations elicited, if I understand it correctly. So you focused on the positive ones only. Do you think that's that directly falls out of your methodology, or that there is a bias and that only those people who already had the positive representations would come forward and participate in your study? And what are methods to circumvent this biased outcome in a survey?
Well, thank you for the question. So what happened is that like I said, I had for the online survey, for example, I had almost 400 answers, which seems a lot like that, but it was technically addressed to thousands of people because through the public office, I was able to send to put in place what should have been an email chain, so that every parent, for example, would have received every parent whose child was learning Occitan in a bilingual school should have received the email, and I think that not everybody received it. And then I had chosen a few schools where I contacted the schools directly and asked if they could spread the email to all the parents, because in those schools it was possible to learn Occitan and most of the kids didn't. So the idea was also to try and access those parents through there, because for example, for conducting interviews, I could interview, I mean, you don't do research on your family, but I mean, for example, I have a nephew, I have a niece, they don't learn Occitan, but there's no Occitan school in their city, for example. So I don't think those types of parents would be interesting, because if they don't have access to that kind of schooling, it would really mean that you have to be extra motivated if you want to go to another town for that type of schools, etc., etc. So I had a few parents from those bilingual schools where there were bilingual sections that did answer the survey, and some of them did give contact info. So I tried, but very few. I think I had like something like maybe I don't remember, 50 parents maybe whose children didn't learn Occitan who answered the survey. So I was grateful, and I think 10 of them left their contact info to be part of the interviews. And when I contacted them, none of them answered after 3 solicitations. And the ones that did actually had answered that their children did not study Occitan, well, were not studying Occitan, but some of them had been studying Occitan. And the only one of this group that I could interview was actually a teacher in a bilingual school, but her children were going to a different school. And so it was interesting, but it was not really exactly what I was looking for. And the problem is I didn't really know how to access those parents who do not choose to participate in those programs. And like you said, clearly there's a bias in that when I send the survey, of course, people who are not interested in that are not going to want to answer. And it's true that I didn't know how to circumvent that problem. And that's also why I decided to focus on, it's not so much on the positive representations, but rather on the representations of the people who do engage in that type of social activity, let's call it. So that's why, but it's true that I mean, I see this as a fault. It's true, but I decided to focus on the positive and to rather, it's a qualitative research. So the idea is for me is not to be exhaustive, but rather to go and see what can motivate people and what does motivate some people on the ground. The idea being for me to then present to the public office, maybe not so much strategies, but just to show them what the parents said, and if they can maybe use it in forms of communications or things like that. And just you mentioned the Grégoire Andréau. I haven't read his thesis yet, but it is in my to be read list. And I was just writing part of my thesis today that I'm basing partially on one of the articles, because he also went in Calandrette and had children draw, and so I am reading that article right now and drawing on his methodology. Exactly, thank you.
If I may, I can continue, or if somebody else has questions, then of course I'm happy to step back.
You can continue. Maya has put a question in the chat about Breton. We'll get to that, I suppose. Or we can answer
Yeah.
whoever. Yeah. You guys are both, you all are both linked to the world of the schooling questions, so however it works.
Yeah, I was wondering then about you mentioned that the ultimate goal of the project was to encourage families to enroll their children into Calendaretta, and how to kind of push them to do that by playing on their positive representation and enhancing them. So I guess it's not only that the goal, but the ultimate goal is to revitalize Occitan through the school system. So I guess that's the real ultimate goal. So I was wondering, I've been thinking, well, a lot about this, and I'm coming back to the OPLO survey that you mentioned at the very beginning, which I have perused and not really read in depth. But what I remember from that was the transmission gap in Occitan, unlike in other minority languages of Europe, is at 2 or even 3 generations. So a lot of people that I interviewed anywhere in Occitania, be it the OPLO survey, our own interviews, or anything else that's out there, if they really learn Occitan, and often it's from the grandparents or even the great-grandparents, we know that. So I was wondering about how, whether there would be a method, would you think there would be a method not to enhance the positive representation necessarily of the children or the parents, who often are very susceptible to that and will go with that, but of those who still speak the language, that is the elderly people. I know you just had very bad experiences in this one IPAD that you where you interviewed, but I also heard in my own work and in other interviews, and that there are indeed older people who, even if they did not transmit the language back then to their own children for the reasons that you discussed, but then have a kind of switch of what in social linguistics is called a muda, a conscious revelation of some kind of, I change now, I have to do this, I love my language and I want to transmit it after all, and then they do it with the grandchildren. Whether it wouldn't be more more efficient in a way to connect with that generation, because this is the generation that had created the gap. For those that are still there, why can't they help fill it? Know what I mean? What do you think about this? Is it just a thought?
Je peux commencer par rapport à ma thèse well, thanks for the question. Well, as for my research, it was OPLO that wanted that specific axis of research, because the National Education Ministry is part of OPLO, and so that's one of the ways that they implement policies. And so that's one of the reasons. Something that I found interesting in the interviews that I conducted, however, is that of the very few people who actually speak Occitan that I interviewed, most of which are working to develop as in an official capacity or associative capacity to develop Occitan. I think none of them, I mean, it's like 5 or 6 people I talked to, but none of them learned it as a mother tongue or in childhood, and I think all or most of them learned it from either middle school, high school, or even university level. And now they speak Occitan to their children. They speak Occitan more than French for some of them. They speak Occitan to their neighbors. They work in Occitan for the development of Occitan. So that's something that I find interesting. It's that you can enter in the language later, also because it's a Romance language that's quite easy to learn for a French speaker. So I'm kind of rather pursuing that kind of angle personally, because that's what I found in my corpus. But the elderly is the public that we are targeting with Claro, and I'm going to maybe let Lucie answer for her corpus and maybe Claro.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, what I want to say is that there are initiatives. For example, one school did mention that they had elderly people from one EHPAD, well, a retirement home, come in, and actually it was kind of a difficult workshop in the sense that the elderly people, could not understand why the young people wanted to speak it, why it was taught, because for them they were so badly punished, even sometimes physically, when they would speak it, that they could not understand why, when we had like English nowadays, Spanish, French, obviously, why you want to learn Occitan. And that's why maybe the first step, before these people pass it on to their grandchildren or to children, kids in general, would be to destigmatize. And that's what we're trying to do with Claro. First, to try to to show them that it's a language that you can write research on. When I told them actually that I was paid by the university, because I have a contrat doctoral, to research patois, they could not believe it. They were like, wow, that's, and you came all the way from Bordeaux. Okay, it's, for us, it's only a 2-hour drive, but for them, you came all the way from Bordeaux.
And also because it's the big city in the south of France, in the southwest, except for Toulouse. So they were like, wow, this is really like...
And you study it like in Bordeaux, and they pay you to do so. So that's why the next step now for the next workshop is going to be like to present them our research. We're not going to present it the way we did today, like with the Occitan. We're going to start like by talking like, oh, do you know like the representations? Do you know like where patois is spoken? And then we're going to introduce Occitan, the word Occitan. I think there was a question about that in the chat. We're going to introduce the Occitan and see how it goes, and try and see if we can destigmatize the language a little bit. And one thing that worked very well during the workshop is that, well, I don't speak Occitan Limousin because it was not passed on to me. I'm learning it, and they were very, very enthusiastic to teach it to me. I had like 13 teachers, and they were all correcting my pronunciation, and they really seemed to enjoy it, and they even like afterwards kept talking in patois, in Occitan, which they did not do before. So that was really interesting.
But it took time during the workshop. First we had the interviews the 2 first days, and then the workshop, and then it lasted like 1 hour and a half, I think. And at the beginning we started asking, do you speak patois sometimes in the retirement home? And they were like, no, never. And then one of them, and we knew they did because they had told us the day before in the interviews, so they were contradicting themselves in the group. And then one of them said, oh yes, sometimes, maybe. And then they started to say, oh yes, sometimes. And after 1 hour and a half of talking together, of them teaching Lucie in a way, they were all speaking patois. One of them even said something to her friend, and then Lucie said, oh, I didn't hear what you were saying, can you repeat please? And she was like, no, I don't want you to understand what I'm saying. And it was like really, we could see that. And that's why also we didn't come there wanting to specifically work on destigmatization. We were coming there to see if they said patois or Occitan. And in the end, that's, I think, what I am most thrilled about this, is that we added this component to the project, to go back to the retirement home and see how we, by the fact that we are conducting research on them and with them, how that can maybe help destigmatize Occitan for them.
Yeah, and they were particularly interested, like for example, with the material we put forward when it was something for Krinkau, I think it was that we used. It's a little video of someone like planting like leeks, for example, in their garden, also with carrots and everything, and it worked like really well because it was something that they knew, the vocabulary that they knew as well, and that works very well. And so that's also something that we are using, like things that they do enjoy and they do know, and then we are introducing things from our research, like the maybe wider spectrum of Occitan, and we're going to see how and if that destigmatized the language a little bit, and how we can move forward with that, and if they want to keep being like my teachers kind of, but like more so like talk in Occitan or in patois.
Well, that sounds like a really good approach. It sounds like it really works. And I guess if I don't know if you record this, but if you record this, then you could actually trace the percentage of Occitan versus French spoken by any given person over time, over the time of the interactions, which would require probably to have multiple microphones, to have multiple channels. But that would actually be a very nice research project. Keep in mind, because because that would be perhaps something where you wouldn't even need to mention that you want to destigmatize it. I wouldn't mention that, actually, not to the persons.
Oh no, we're
No, it's
not.
not. No.
Yeah.
No, we're not saying it, and but how can I say? Because for example, we also wanted to try when Lucie mentioned the video that we showed them two videos, what let's say three videos with three different speakers, all speaking the Limousin dialect of Occitan, but not the same Limousin. And the first one was the closest to the way they speak, and then the second one was in the same part of Limousin, but a bit further. And then the other one was in the neighboring county, but also Limousin. And they were really like, we asked, do you understand what they're saying? And they were like, yeah, but not everything. And the further we went, but it was like less, I think it was less than 100 kilometers. And they were like, if we didn't have the image as well, we wouldn't have understood that much, and things like that. But also the subject was further from their personal interests. So that's something that also we're working on. But what was interesting is that they were very interested in some of the videos, so that helped them maybe. Well, that helps this destigmatization just by showing them also. That's what we wanted to do. We didn't say we're going to help you destigmatize, but we showed them with the idea to show that it's possible to have a TV show in Occitan, and maybe they didn't know, for example. And we asked, what do you think about it? Have you already seen it, etc., etc. But for us, it also allowed us to collect data on how they perceive the differences within the dialects, and what it speaks to in terms of their representation. Like some of them would say that almost in the neighboring village, they don't exactly speak the same way, or we don't understand them. And then this is a way also for us to test whether they actually understand it, and whether they know or not that this variety is spoken there. So that's kind of what we mean by destigmatizing by the way of conducting research.
Yeah.
But this is all very new for us. So.
Yeah, and the interesting thing very quickly is that also what we noticed is that we also did like a reading of something like written in the graphie normalisée, and they did not really, like, some of them were able to read it a little bit because they do read it in La Montagne, which is the regional newspaper. There's a little column on it every week, but also it was like very difficult to them, so they found easier the books that were written, for example, in phonetics, like not in the graphie normalisée, but in phonetic. And something that the associative field is not necessarily promoting or putting forward. And so that's also something that we're not sure yet, but we might include in the research, like how maybe the graphie normalisée, that definitely help, but also these like phonetic books, how they can help, like, reconnect with the language and everything.
What was also interesting to me was the attitude. So all the attitudes that they had towards their language and towards their language as a collective, let's say, or the language of the others in the group during the workshop. For example, we had one lady who spoke Limousin, but from the neighboring county. and she didn't pronounce in the same way. And one of the participants kept correcting her, but kind of like a teacher, really like she was saying, no, we don't say like this, we say like this. And so Lucy had to kind of mediate to try and not say like shut up and don't berate the other lady, and to be more like not say all opinions are valid, but rather she was trying to say like, oh, okay, so you, where you come from, people say like this, and you, where you come from, people say like this. And this is also trying to work through asking them, how do you pronounce? And then trying to show, without being a teacher, but trying to explain to them that also it's valid to have any pronunciation that all those people have because they are native speakers. And that it's not a question of the right or the correct pronunciation. And we know, especially as French speakers and people who have been, especially for that generation, but even our generation, we are taught that there's one way to speak French, etc., etc. And again, then you have to de-learn that when you go to university studying languages or language sciences. But for me, that was very interesting to see how, that in a way, they don't necessarily see Occitan as something that has a link with school, but they reproduce the way that they were taught about French towards Occitan. And so they are going to correct you on the pronunciation and say that you don't pronounce it like this, like that. So I found it very interesting in the way that Lucy had to deal with this this mediation within the workshop, to say like. And then there was another lady who came from a bit south, and from the Lot, and so she spoke the Gascon and not the Limousin dialect. Languedocian. No, I think she spoke Gascon because really it was like, well, at least I speak Gascon, and so sometimes I would also exchange with her, and that was a way to try and show them that it's not exactly the same patois, but it's close, and I have a connection with her, and Lucy has a connection with the others, but we all have a connection together. But the idea is not to say it like that, but rather to show it by speaking, by exchanging examples and exchanging about how do you pronounce, how do you say that, and things like that.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about let's see, this question of international, the conference that's coming up. You're bringing in the Brazilian researchers. So what other connections to other minority languages have you found with this research, and maybe Breton or other minority languages of France or of the world?
That's an interesting question. One thing that I can say is that something that's in the future that's also a part of RECLAM. We didn't mention it because it wasn't like set in stone. But I've been invited to Brazil and Argentina in October to give like conferences about Occitan. And they have like study groups about like their minority languages, so I'm going to meet with them and talk with them. And I think that's something that I'm going to bring back to Bordeaux and see what connections we can have, if we can have like working groups like together from the both sides of the Atlantic. So that's something that we are currently working on. I don't know, Marie, if you know maybe a bit more about Breton than I do, if you want to answer on that.
We haven't had connection with Bretons as of yet through the RECLAM project, but we have had a few paper proposals from Breton teams. And what I have noticed is that the Breton, when we say you can add an abstract in the minority language that you study or speak, they do send a resume in Breton. So we're not going to be able to read it, but really the French, at least like the Breton, the Basque, and so on, if they participate and you say you can write an abstract in the minority language, they do. But for example, from people from from Latin America, sometimes I think we receive like propositions in Spanish, but they wrote the email in English, for example, and they didn't send a resume in the minority language. And so we're going to study all of that. So that doesn't really answer your question, but that's the kind of things that we're looking at internationally. We have tried to reach out as internationally as possible. And we are going, I think this week or next week, to have a meeting to see exactly where we are with all the proposals, how many from where, about which languages, and so on. During the workshop in January, we had mostly Occitan, a little bit of Basque that came from our team as well. The Guarani so that was from Paraguay, but Cami is also working on it in Brazil. And then there were languages from Oceania as well.
Yeah, Australia especially.
Australia as well, and
Vanuatu and New Caledonia.
And so as of yet, those are the languages or linguistic areas that have been touched on by people who spoke within RECLAM.
Yeah.
We're hoping more. We'll see. We would like very much I would like very much speeches from talking about indigenous languages in the US, for example, and because in October I discovered a film during the local Occitan festival that they have in Bordeaux in September, October, November. We had there was a film. A documentary that's called Un pont sur l'océan, and it talks about the relationship that was created in the 19th century between some Osage indigenous people from Oklahoma and the community of Montauban in the southwest of France. And now they have this association which is called OC and OC for Occitan and Oklahoma, or Oklahoma and Occitan, I don't know. And so this film is mostly in Occitan and English with bits in French and bits in Osage as well. And I was really interested in that project, and so there is really a link, for example, between the Osage community in the US and the Montauban community, the Occitan community in Montauban. We tried to contact them. I hope they will present something for the non-scientific panel, but we're reaching out. So if you have any contact to anyone that might be interested, please send the word.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess not then. Well, thank you, Lucie and Marie, for wonderful presentations, and as well as for a full slate of questions. I think we're going to be leaving this talk very curious and ready for this conference. Maybe some of us will attend. Maybe some of us will um, come in some other way. If that is all, please feel free to reach out to me. I've dropped my email in the chat if you would like to know anything more about this group or would like to connect further with the speakers. We can help facilitate that. Thank you all for coming today, and we hope to see you next year.
Thank you, Oliver, for hosting this. It was a pleasure.
Merci, Serre, et à 10 chats à tous.
À 10 chats.
Ciao.